In November 2011, Paul Frampton, the theoretical particle physicist, met Denise Milani, a Czech bikini model, on the online dating site mate1.com. She was gorgeous, dark-haired and dark-eyed, with a supposedly natural DDD breast size. In some photos, she looked hauntingly steamy. In others, she offered a warm smile. Soon, Frampton and Milani were chatting online nearly every day. Frampton would return home from campus. He'd been a professor in the physics and astronomy department at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill for 30 years, and his computer would buzz. "Are you there, honey?" They'd chat on Yahoo Messenger for a while, and then he'd go into the other room to take care of something. A half-hour later, there was the familiar buzz. It was always Milani. "What are you doing now?" Frampton had been very lonely since his divorce 3 years earlier. Now it seemed those days were over. Milani told him she was longing to change her life. She was tired, she said, of being a glamour model, of posing in her bikini on the beach while men ogled her. She wanted to settle down, have children. But she worried what he thought of her. "Do you think you could ever be proud of someone like me?" Of course he could, he assured her. Frampton tried to get Milani to talk on the phone, but she always demurred. When she finally agreed to meet him in person, she asked him to come to La Paz, Bolivia, where she was doing the photo shoot. On January 7, 2012, Frampton set out for Bolivia via Toronto and Santiago, Chile. At 68, he dreamed of finding a wife to bear him children, and what a wife! He pictured introducing her to his colleagues. One thing worried him, though. She had told him that men hit on her all the time. How did that acclaim affect her? Did it go to her head? But he remembered how comforting it felt to be chatting with her, like having a companion in the next room. And he knew she loved him. She'd said so many times. Frampton didn't plan on a long trip. He needed to be back to teach. So he left his car at the airport. Soon, he hoped, he'd be returning with Milani on his arm. The first thing that went wrong was that the e-ticket Milani sent Frampton for the Toronto-Santiago leg of his journey turned out to be invalid, leaving him stranded in the Toronto airport for a full day. Frampton finally arrived in La Paz 4 days after he set out. He hoped to meet Milani the next morning, but by then she had been called away to another photo shoot in Brussels. She promised to send him a ticket to join her there, so Frampton, who had checked into the Evia Palace Hotel, worked on a physics paper while he waited for it to arrive. He and Milani kept in regular contact. A ticket to Buenos Aires eventually came, with the promise that another ticket to Brussels was on the way. All Milani asked was that Frampton do her a favor, bring her a bag that she had left in La Paz. While in Bolivia, Frampton corresponded with an old friend, John Dixon, the physicist and lawyer who lives in Ontario. When Frampton explained what he was up to, Dixon became alarmed. His warnings to Frampton were unequivocal. "Dixon told me not long ago," still clearly upset. "I said, well, inside that suitcase sewn into a lining will be cocaine. You're in big trouble." Paul said, "I'll be careful, I'll make sure there isn't cocaine in there, and if there is, I'll ask them to remove it. I thought they were probably going to kidnap him and torture him to get his money. I didn't know he didn't have money." I said, "Well, you're going to be killed, Paul, so whom should I contact when you disappeared?" And he said, "You can contact my brother and my former wife." Frampton later told me that he shrugged off Dixon's warnings about drugs as melodramatic, adding that he rarely pays attention to the opinions of others. On the evening of January 20th, 9 days after he arrived in Bolivia, a man Frampton describes as Hispanic but whom he didn't get a good look at handed him a bag out on the dark street in front of his hotel. Frampton was expecting to be given an Hermes for a Louis Vuitton, but the bag was an utterly commonplace black cloth suitcase with wheels. Once he was back in his room, he opened it. It was empty. He wrote to Milani, asking why this particular suitcase was so important. She told him it had sentimental value. The next morning, he filled it with his dirty laundry and headed to the airport. Frampton flew from La Paz to Buenos Aires, crossing the border without incident. He says that he spent the next 40 hours in Azizar airport, without sleeping, mainly doing physics and checking his email regularly in hopes that an e-ticket to Brussels would arrive. But by the time the ticket materialized, Frampton had gotten a friend to send him a ticket to Raleigh. He had been gone for 15 days and was ready to go home. Because there was always the chance that Melanie would come to North Carolina and want her bag, he checked bags, his and hers, and went to the gate. Soon he heard his name called over the loudspeaker. He thought it must be for an upgrade to first class, but when he arrived at the airline counter, he was greeted by several policemen. Asked to identify his luggage. "That's my bag," he said. "The other one's not my bag, but I checked it in." He waited while the police tested the contents of a package found in the Melanie suitcase. Within hours, he was under arrest. I first met Frampton this past fall in the prison warden's office in Devoto, one of the few remaining old-style jails in Buenos Aires, so dilapidated that its windows stick open and rain leaks through the roof. It was September, the beginning of spring in the southern hemisphere, but there was still a chill in the air, and the prison heating system was down as usual. "Hey Professor, have you won the Nobel yet?" a guard shouted as Frampton walked by. He was wearing a red Adidas tracksuit. Adidas seems to have a franchise in Devoto, he said, running shoes and a tattered barber coat to keep warm. "This is the coat the royal family wears. It's for hunting," Frampton, who grew up in Britain, pointed out. "See, it has this pocket in the back where you can put the dead bird." Frampton had been in Devoto for 8 months, awaiting trial on charges of transporting 2 kilos of cocaine into the country. He was housed not in a single cell but in a group pavilion with 80 men accused of drug dealing or smuggling, most of them from other Latin American countries. Frampton had had almost no experience with drugs in his life, apart from the occasional drink and a nicotine addiction he'd given up smoking 2 years before. Now he was living with people who were not only well-versed in the intricacies of the drug trade but regular users of marijuana and cocaine. The pavilion was often illuminated at night by little flames held under spoons, as inmates cooked paco, a cocaine paste similar to crack that is often made with kerosene and sulfuric acid. But there were good things about not being in a private cell, too. The number of the prisoners on the pavilion had their own TVs. On Sunday mornings, Frampton would turn on the classical music station, Arpeggio, so he could listen for a few hours before others got up and switched the channel back to music videos. Whenever his case was reported on local news channels, pictures of Denise Melanie would flash across the TV screen, eliciting catcalls and applause from the other prisoners. "I'm a bit of a celebrity in here," Frampton said. From the moment of his arrest he had maintained that he was the victim of a scam, even if it didn't occur to him right away that the Melanie with whom he was corresponding was not the real Melanie, and he projected the sense that all that had happened to him was a mistake that would soon be resolved. "Perfectly congenial," he kept punctuating my questions about his present predicament with "and after this, we'll get to physics, right?" Finally, eyes burning with schoolboy enthusiasm, interrupted now and then by a spasmodic cough. "He has a lung condition, which the smoke-filled prison air worsened." He talked me through what he called his 14 groundbreaking discoveries, which he had written out for me on a piece of notepaper. Frampton closed our interview half seriously, half impishly, with another kind of calculation. "I've co-authored with 3 Nobel laureates. Only 11 theoretical physicists have done that. 6 out of those 11 have won Nobel Prizes themselves. Following this logic, I have a 55% chance of getting the Nobel.